Well, we had Bonang Mapali from Shell. Now we've got Professor Adam Habib on Business This Week. He's a political analyst. More importantly, he's the Wits Vice-Chancellor. Welcome to you, Adam. Now, we had a list of very important kinds of topics. Zuma and the no confidence vote, Anglo-American, the minimum wage. But I think we're going to have to start with Cecil John Rhodes.
Absolutely.
And what your counterpart, Max Price, who used to be the Dean of Medicine at Wits, is now the Vice-Chancellor there. Boy, this is when the Vice-Chancellors have to earn their money, even if they don't earn very much. What are your thoughts on this? And I think perhaps the way to kick it off is these sorts of things go straight to the racial fault line in South Africa, don't they?
No, absolutely. I mean, I can't resist the opportunity by saying that Max Price from ex-Dean, you know, this is cadre deployment from Wits to UCT. So, I mean, look, I think Max is in a very difficult point. And I think that there are a couple of issues. Obviously, it's about race. And obviously, these are very deep emotional issues. There are two things that I would have liked to see, whether it's at UCT or elsewhere. I wish we dealt with these things earlier. If we deal with them in a proactive way, then we're not on our back foot when the issue actually explodes. And it seems to me that if we, all of us, not UCT, all of us had taken the issue of naming memorabilia very much earlier on, we would be able to grapple with it in a much more uplifting way than we can at this moment. So that's the first thing. I must say, I don't like breaking statues. I don't like destroying our past. Because what that says is we're trying to clean up our history. And if you start forgetting your history, there is the danger that you start repeating them. On the other hand, I think the students and many of the black staff are absolutely correct. Why is such a memorabilia at the heart of this campus? And what does it say about the values of what of who we actually think about and who we memorabilize in this kind of way?
I think we're going to take that conversation a step further, but before we do, let's take a quick snapshot look at some of the tweets that have been making the rounds. So what we saw making the rounds were these A4 white pieces of paper, and this one says, hashtag Rhodes so white, and underneath that it says, you can pronounce Gert, but not Gadebe, which is exactly the same phonetically. And that brings us back, of course, to the point that you've just made about what does this memorabilia actually say about us. Now, I'm not a Rhodesy or a Witsy as he is. I'm a Tikkie. And so I've also had, you know, being in a university.
You should have gone to university rather.
Fantastic university, actually. But if you could give us a sense of the degree of transformation in South African institutions, has it really, we had that cosmetic, almost technical mixing and matching, but has the soul of the institutions actually changed?
So it hasn't. So let me tell you if there wasn't the emotional debate and I was thinking about this in UCT, what I would do. I wouldn't break the statue down. I would put a second statue right next to it. And that second statue would be dedicated to the victims of Rhodes. And then I'll put a plaque that tells the story of Rhodes and what he did, so that nobody forgets, and why it took us 21 years to address that legacy.
Byron, as a Witsy, obviously with an interest in these things, I'm thinking, you know, Rhodes University is obviously under pressure now as well because it's named after the man. Witwatersrand is a neutral geographic term, so are we going to escape this, I wonder?
Yeah, I think we're fortunate, but I'm actually a Rhodesy as well. I went to both.
A rodent, they call them.
A rodent, yes. Just a little history on why Rhodes was called Rhodes. It was four gentlemen from St. Andrew's College decided that they wanted to create a tertiary institution, and it was established in 1904, the year after Cecil John Rhodes died. And they called it Rhodes University because they wanted to try and tap some of the funds that Cecil John Rhodes had left. So it was almost a marketing tool. The only reason they named it after Rhodes was because they wanted his money. And they even put his plaque in the emblem, which was afterwards taken down. But I think, you know, that kind of history is extremely important to the university. So I wouldn't be pushing to change the name. I mean, I don't see how that could offend anyone.
But I do want to answer your question. How well have we transformed? At one level we have. So you come to Wits University now, 76% of our students are black. That never existed
Yeah.
20 years ago. But if you look at our staff, a significant proportion of them are still white. If you look at our curriculum, some of it's changing, but not sufficiently. There's a wonderful piece written by political science graduate students at Wits University, which is a critique of the political science curriculum of Wits University, saying, why aren't we celebrating our own history sufficiently? Why aren't we thinking through philosophers, African philosophers, in a more serious way? I think there is a serious question about, while we may have changed certain things in a racial sense, the real soul of what it means to be both cosmopolitan and African simultaneously has not happened. And that's the big challenge. I think whether you're talking about Wits, UCT, some of the institutions have the problem in a much more deeper way than others, but that's a problem for all of us, and that's what we've got to confront.
Let's talk about a great African who sadly passed away on Sunday, the late Minister Collins Chabane. Any personal interactions that you might have had with him?
You know, he's come a couple of times to Wits University, and obviously we've interacted at various other occasions. And he has left a legacy. I mean, there's firstly two things that I think is just fantastic. Here's a cabinet minister who loved music.
Yes.
He was, I mean, how many cabinet ministers in the world, you know, that could jive like Colin Chabane could? I mean, it's just delightful. And that's something that I think people remember about him most of all. So I think that's the first thing that has to be celebrated. The second, you know, much of the monitoring and evaluation, and that's where Wits interacted with him in significant ways, because we've got a very strong, a clear monitoring and evaluation unit that has been established that worked very closely with the presidency. And he was responsible for that. He put the architecture down, he put the processes down, he played a significant role. I think there's a third thing about Colin Chabane that's worth bearing in mind. And that is, he's one of, you know, the ANC is an enormously factionalized organization. He's one of the few people in the ANC and in the cabinet that could talk across factions. And that, I think, is going to be particularly missed by
So in
the
that
president.
sense, the country's robbed of a politician who could have reconciled.
Who had the ability to
Yeah.
pick up the phone and go to people across the divide and say, can we sit down and talk? And that, I think, if you're the president, you're going to particularly miss in the coming months.
We talked about Eskom to Bukamwa Harley. Now, a view from you as a political analyst rather than as a Vice-Chancellor on the governance at Eskom, where you've got, who's actually in charge here? Is it the Deputy President with his war room? I'm not sure who they're fighting. There's a war room. There's a board. There's a minister. There's the President.
There's an interim CEO.
An interim CEO, 4 acting non-executives in executive positions. I mean, in any organization, imagine the looking over the shoulder, the fear to make a decision, just sit and do nothing. Isn't it appalling that we've got to this?
So it's shocking. It's absolutely shocking. And I think that there's 3 fundamental reasons. One, when you make bad appointments, sooner or later it catches you. And our bad appointments has been at multiple levels. It's at the board level, it's at the executive level, and you've had political interference of all kinds for too long in an organization. You know, what we've confused in South Africa is the difference between public and state. A state institution is very different from a public institution. Wits is a public institution. We have a board, the minister has representatives of it, donors have representation on it, all kinds of stakeholders, public stakeholders, civil society,
Students, staff,
students, all have representation on it. It's a public institution. But no minister would dare pick up the phone and say, can you make sure that the following student is included? Or can you make sure that that organization gets the tender? They wouldn't dare. Because we run separately. There is an independence. That board is responsible, that council is responsible for managing this institution. They're responsible for stewarding me and keeping me on the correct tracks. That's the responsibility. You don't have that. We've confused public institution with state institution. And then suddenly you move from a public to thinking that a minister can pick up the phone and say who should get the tender, who should get the job. That's the problem. So that's the first thing. It's the kinds of people we appointed. Second is the political interference in the place, and that's shocking. And third, you know, both communication and basic management is atrocious in this. I feel like taking that entire bunch, the whole board, the whole exec, and putting them through a communication 101 course and a management 101 course at Wits. Because there's every basic rule has just been broken in Eskom. And that's the shocking thing about it.
Communications 101.
I think it's in their case 001.
Humongous thank you to
I
Professor
think
Adam Habib.
he's not slow. He's marketing now. He's marketing the MITS courses to Eskom.
No, absolutely. I think that's what this is all about.
On Monday, let's just see how many lights are still on at Eskom.
A big thank you to Professor Adam Habib. He's a political analyst and Wits Vice-Chancellor, and certainly one outspoken South African.